Hi everyone, my name is Callista, and right now I'm enjoying the single life. But once upon a time, I was married to a man named Thayer. Sadly, that marriage, along with his parents, Beckett and Azura, made my life pretty hard. Even though Thayer and I both had good jobs and earned well, his parents always saw me as someone just trying to take advantage of their son. This misconception was largely fueled by Thayer himself. He constantly bragged about how fortunate I was to marry into his luxurious life, hinting that it was something I could never achieve on my own. Because of this attitude, his parents viewed me as some sort of gold digger. Thayer's tendency to paint me as dependent on him financially led his parents to demand a prenuptial agreement before our wedding. Now, I wasn't completely against a prenup in principle, but what really hurt was how Thayer didn't even talk to me about it. He kept the lie going that I was making far less money than him, which only made his parents think even less of me. To avoid embarrassing him, I didn't correct the false image he was spreading, and that only brought me more judgment and unfair treatment from his family. I stayed silent because I loved Thayer, even though it was becoming more and more obvious that he didn't feel the same or respect me as he should. After Thayer lost his job, he started living off my income, all while letting his parents think it was the other way around. I was growing more and more tired of carrying both of us financially, and his refusal to find a new job made things worse. The breaking point came when I decided to buy a house with my savings and some money I had inherited. I found a house I adored, and I bought it in my name alone, which Thayer was not happy about. This decision made me stop and really think about my relationship, and it eventually helped me realize I needed to stand on my own. I had to remind Thayer that he hadn't contributed anything financially to the house, but he continued to hassle me about it. What really pushed me to the edge happened one evening during a family dinner. Everything was fine until his parents started asking about the new house. They seemed curious, but it was clear they assumed Thayer was the one who had paid for it, considering how little they thought I was earning. We've settled into the new house just last week, and it's already furnished, so the move was pretty smooth, I said, trying to keep the conversation light and neutral. I hoped this would be the moment when Thayer would finally correct his parents and give me credit for buying the house. But instead of telling the truth, Thayer claimed that he had paid for the entire house with his financial success. His parents were thrilled, showering him with praise and completely ignoring the fact that I had made the purchase. I looked at Thayer, hoping for some sign of acknowledgement, but he avoided eye contact. I was furious, but somehow managed to keep my cool in front of his parents. I didn't want to make a scene, but as soon as we were alone, I couldn't hold back any longer. What was that, Thayer? Why would you tell your parents you bought the house all by yourself? I demanded, utterly shocked at the lie he had just told. He tried to defend himself, saying that he didn't want to disappoint his parents by admitting that he had lost his job. I just wanted to make them happy, he said. You could have simply told them we both contributed to buying the house, I argued, feeling crushed by the betrayal. His claim of sole ownership was a huge blow to my pride. But Thayer was dismissive, saying what's done is done, and that there was no point in correcting it now. He refused to tell his parents the truth, prioritizing his own pride over my dignity and our relationship. That was when it finally hit me. Thayer cared more about his ego and avoiding personal embarrassment than he did about me or the truth. He was perfectly fine with letting his parents believe he was the sole provider while I did all the work. His refusal to find a job and constant pestering about putting his name on the house deed only made things worse. I started to feel like I was being taken advantage of, but despite all of this, I still wasn't sure what to do next. That indecision lingered until the next day, when something happened that pushed me over the edge. I heard the doorbell ring, and since I was busy, I asked Thayer to answer it. When he opened the door, I couldn't believe my eyes. His parents were standing there, suitcases in hand, ready to move in. They had somehow gotten the impression, thanks to Thayer, that they were invited to live with us in the new house indefinitely. Thayer welcomed them with open arms, playing the part of the generous son who had supposedly bought this big house and could now take care of his parents. They praised him endlessly, and Thayer soaked it all in, leaving me speechless with anger and disbelief. My mind was racing. I couldn't believe how far Thayer had gone with his lies. I had worked hard to buy that house, and now his parents were moving in. Thinking it was all thanks to him, I reluctantly agreed to this arrangement, but the sheer audacity of it all made it crystal clear that Thayer had gone too far with his lies. Even though I didn't want to cause a scene in front of his family, I knew deep down that there was no way I could let this situation continue. The idea of his parents living in my house, based on a complete lie, was something I just couldn't accept. At that moment, I realized that I needed to take decisive action to reclaim not only my home, but also my dignity. Navigating this situation required a delicate balance. I didn't want to explode, but I knew I had to handle this sudden turn of events with as much grace as possible. Meanwhile, Thayer's parents were practically over the moon, excitedly talking about how spacious the house was. They kept going on about how cramped their previous home had been and how lucky they were now to live in such luxury. Thanks to Thayer. Each word was like salt in a wound, especially when they started discussing the 5 bedrooms and their eagerness to claim the largest one for themselves. Let's hold off on choosing rooms for a moment, I suggested, trying to keep my tone calm. I need to talk to Thayer privately. Thayer, sensing the seriousness of the conversation that was about to unfold, clearly wanted to avoid it. He nervously glanced at me but refused to make eye contact. Instead, he tried to brush it off, suggesting we could discuss things in front of his parents. His attempt to deflect only made the discomfort worse. If you're fine with it, Thayer, we can talk here, I said, my patience wearing thin. At that point, I was done beating around the bush. Thayer, your parents cannot stay here. It's not happening. You didn't even ask me before making such a decision. How could you think this is okay? Before Thayer could respond, his mother, Azura, immediately jumped in to defend him. She acted as if the house was Thayer's to do with as he pleased, implying I had no say in the matter. Her boldness left me stunned. She even went so far as to hint that I should be careful not to get kicked out. It was like she didn't hear a word I said, and her demand to see the largest bedroom, as if I didn't exist, was the final straw. The situation had gone from a misunderstanding to outright disrespect. It became clear that Thayer's parents didn't see me as a partner in our life together. Instead, they viewed me as an outsider in my own home. Their dismissive attitude, combined with Thayer's willingness to let this happen, showed a complete lack of respect for me and for the basic values of communication and mutual respect that should exist in any marriage. I stood my ground, refusing Azura's demand with a firmness that clearly surprised both her and Beckett. As I stared at them, I couldn't help but think about who was really at fault here. Yes, their sense of entitlement was outrageous, but it was Thayer's lies that had started all of this. If it weren't for his false promises and the deceit he had spun, we wouldn't be in this mess. But that didn't excuse Azura and Beckett's behavior. They had boldly walked into my home and even threatened my place in it, and I wasn't going to overlook that. Azura and Beckett, clearly caught off guard by my resistance, tried to insist that Thayer had promised them the largest room and that they were already planning to stay. In fact, they revealed that they had even ended the lease on their old home in anticipation of moving in with us. You've made a big mistake, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. There is no way you'll be staying here, especially under these circumstances. Their outrage was obvious. They insisted that my opinion didn't matter and that Thayer would fix everything. They were so sure that Thayer would get them what they wanted, which only made me realize how deep this deception ran. You're mistaken, Azura, I said, taking a deep breath. It seems Thayer hasn't told you the truth. The house is mine, not his, and you won't be staying here. Their disbelief was written all over their faces. They accused me of lying, saying there was no way the house could be mine. I suggested they ask Thayer for confirmation, hoping that, finally, he would be forced to come clean. Both Beckett and Azura turned to Thayer, expecting him to back up his lies. But as they waited for him to confirm their beliefs, Thayer was cornered. He had to choose between keeping up the facade or admitting the truth. The tension in the room grew as Thayer avoided eye contact, shifting uncomfortably in his seat. It was clear he didn't want to confront the truth, but his silence spoke volumes. His refusal to meet his parents' gaze was a quiet confession that everything I had said was true. Finally, I offered to show the property documents to prove my ownership. If you still don't believe me, I can show you the paperwork, I said firmly. The reality of the situation was slowly beginning to sink in for his parents, though they were still grappling with it. For so long, they had believed the story Thayer had spun, that I was financially dependent on him and that he was the successful provider. Now, faced with the truth, they struggled to accept it. As Thayer sat there, refusing to speak up, the weight of his deception was undeniable. The longer he remained silent, the more it became clear to everyone that he had lied. The house was mine, and I wasn't about to let anyone, especially his parents, take that away from me. Thayer's parents were convinced that, given his previously high income, it only made sense for him to own the house. The stark reality of his job loss and dependence on my income was a shock they hadn't anticipated. I corrected them, pointing out that Thayer had been out of work for over a year and that I had a successful career, despite the judgments they had made based on surface-level assumptions. This revelation visibly stunned both Beckett and Azura, leaving them speechless. Thayer, meanwhile, stayed silent, avoiding any confrontation as he continued to stare at the floor. His refusal to speak only added to the tension hanging in the air. Seeing Thayer remain quiet, I decided it was time to end the awkwardness. I told Beckett and Azura that they needed to leave. I had already put up with enough disruption for one day. However, Thayer finally found his voice, pleading with me not to throw them out, explaining that they had nowhere to go since they had already given up their previous living arrangement with the expectation of moving in with us. His plea put me in a tough spot. It wasn't just about enforcing boundaries anymore. It also became about the real-life consequences of Thayer's lies, which now left his parents in a vulnerable position. They had been caught in the web of deceit Thayer had spun, and it wasn't fair to them either. Still, I had to stand firm. "I can and I will, Thayer," I said, my voice leaving no room for argument. "You made these promises without my input, offering them a place in my house as if it were yours to give." Thayer, feeling entitled to a say in the matter just because he was my husband, argued that his word alone should be enough to let his parents stay. He tried to suggest that I had no choice in the matter. Azura chimed in as well, claiming that since we were married, everything I owned was now shared with Thayer, as if the marriage erased my individual rights to the house. "No, Azura, you're mistaken," I responded firmly. "I absolutely can ask you to leave, and Thayer, you'll be leaving with them. Since we're still legally tied, I'll prepare an eviction notice, and I won't stop there. I'll also be seeing a lawyer to start the divorce process." Thayer's reaction to the mention of divorce was immediate and intense. His panic was mixed with anger, as if he had never imagined that I might go this far. In his panic, he lashed out, threatening to take half of the house and demand alimony, clearly hoping to scare me into backing down. "Really, Thayer?" I asked, unable to hide my frustration. "Have you forgotten about the prenup that you were so eager for me to sign?" I reminded him of the agreement's conditions. Neither of us could claim alimony, and our individual assets, like my house, remained ours in the event of a divorce. The prenup, which he and his parents had pushed for, was meant to protect their future, never considering that the tables might turn one day. The reminder hit hard. Thayer, Beckett, and Azura, who had been so confident in Thayer's continued success, were now realizing just how deeply they had miscalculated. The gravity of the situation began to sink in, and with it, their earlier confidence crumbled. Suddenly, their attitude shifted. "Maybe we don't need to rush into a divorce," Azura suggested, her tone now much more subdued. There was an air of desperation in her voice, a sign that they understood how bleak their circumstances had become. "Let's just sit down and figure this out," Thayer proposed, hoping we could come to some kind of mutual agreement. He clearly still believed there was a chance to salvage the situation if we just talked it through. But I had reached my limit. I was done with the lies, the manipulation, and the way they had taken advantage of my kindness. "I'm not here to fix this for you," I replied, my voice unwavering. "I won't be used for your financial gain, Thayer. And I certainly won't tolerate any more exploitation from your parents after everything they've put me through." Thayer tried to brush aside his parents' behavior, downplaying their actions as if they weren't significant. But it was too late for that. I had seen their true colors, and I wasn't going to ignore the way they had treated me in my own home. Thayer and his parents tried to brush off their past behavior, acting as if the issues from before were minor and should be forgiven. But the recent threat they made, trying to evict me from my own home, was something I couldn't just overlook. Their sudden shift to kindness didn't erase the tension that hung thick in the air. They began pleading for my understanding, thinking they could sway me the way they might have done in the past. What they failed to realize was that I had changed. I wasn't the same person they could push around anymore. The fact that they had canceled their lease, assuming they could simply move in with us, showed a complete lack of respect for my autonomy. I wasn't going to let them walk all over me any longer. As it became clear that Beckett and Azura had no intention of leaving, I took the next step. I called the police to have them escorted out. Their departure left Thayer fuming, but I quickly reminded him that he would soon face eviction from my home as well. Faced with the reality of his situation, Thayer's anger turned into apologies and regret. The rapid shift in his attitude was almost exhausting, but I felt relieved knowing that the nightmare was nearing its end. From that moment on, I made it clear that Thayer was no longer welcome in my space. This was the final stand against the years of manipulation I had endured. Until his eviction was finalized, I relegated Thayer to the guest room. With no other choice, he had to face the fact that his time in the house was over. Meanwhile, his parents, who had depleted a good chunk of their savings staying at a hotel, were forced to search for a new rental. Interestingly, they chose not to take Thayer in when they found a place, which seemed like an attempt to hold him accountable for the mess his lies had caused. This created a noticeable rift between Thayer and his parents. The relationship between Thayer and his parents soured quickly. They began to blame each other for their predicament, and soon his parents withdrew their support for him altogether. It became clear that the only thing they had valued about Thayer was his financial contribution, and now that he wasn't able to provide, they cut ties. Left on his own, Thayer had no choice but to rely on the generosity of friends while searching for a job. As for me, I proceeded with the divorce. By that point, it was obvious that our marriage was beyond saving. Thayer's behavior had shown a deep lack of respect and an ingrained selfishness that I could no longer tolerate. While he made attempts to reconcile, I was firm in my decision. I wasn't going to be used anymore. The divorce process moved fairly quickly, largely because we didn't have children. Within 8 months, it was finalized, and we were officially separated. During that time, I focused on rebuilding my life, finding my footing, and eventually even started dating again. Thayer, meanwhile, continued to hold on to the hope that we might get back together, but that was nothing more than a fantasy on his part. For me, the chapter with Thayer was well and truly closed.